So while she's getting that set up, I'm just going to run my mouth because that's what I do. I'm going to spend a little time. It's lovely to meet so many new people. It's awesome. I actually presented kind of the preamble to this at the first Living Games conference, which was before I got my PhD, back when I was just trying to figure out what the hell it was I was going to do. I have since acquired my PhD. I am mighty at my PhD-ness. And I'm now a professor of art education at the University of Toledo. And so this is really about my dissertation from a kind of limited, how can I talk about this in 15 minutes point of view. 8 pages in 15 minutes. Which is, you know, it's a little bit more challenging really than the 20 minutes I had to talk to the committee. But you are much nicer people, so that'll be all right. Do you have a clicker? Is there a clicker? There is a clicker. Or was this a clicker? Before? Yes. Oh, there we go.
Would you like your microphone?
You guys need a microphone from me?
No.
You're good. All right. People sometimes say to me, you should be in radio. I'm like, give me a job. But the problem with this, I can't whisper in the back of class, so when you're doing your presentations, here, I'm sorry. So, just can't whisper. This is kind of the short version of everything I just said, plus a little bit more. So my presentation, I was working very specifically with art educators in a small group, 5 people if you include me, and we were using specifically American Freeform to do arts-based research. I'm relatively certain that arts-based research is the thing that most people are least familiar with. It's always weird to me because when I talk to arts educators, I have to explain everything about LARP. And then when I plan to talk to you lovely people, I have to flip it and talk about the kind of arts ideology. And it's always a bit of a challenge. So the presentation, like most of these, is broken into 3 areas. I'm going to talk a bit about my quirky little methodology. I'm going to talk a bit about how I used American Freeform, and a bit about the data. One thing about the data, sometimes you'll see pictures, such as the one over on the side there, and that was a form of reflection and data gathering I did. All the participants were art educators, or were training to be art educators, and in between sessions, they would do reflective artworks. In this case, somebody was playing the principal of a school, and she sketched what that principal would look like and drew up a little recipe of the elements involved with him in terms of compassion, caring, and a certain amount of awkwardness. So like I said, my methodology, a little bit odd, because basically I didn't find one methodology that especially worked for me, so I took parts of a whole bunch of them and wove them together, because I was a glutton for punishment. The most prevalent of these, probably arts-based research. The principal idea of arts-based research is, like Dave was saying, fidelity is not necessarily the end-all be-all of knowledge. When you have exact numbers, when you have exact words, they have very particular applications. But they are not necessarily great for understanding experience or meaning. So if you think for a moment about drinking a glass of water, this was Elliot Eisner's example, I love stealing it. I can describe its clarity, I can describe how many impurities I have, I can describe a whole lot of things in very technical language that will utterly fail to tell you what it's like to drink a glass of water. To get anywhere close to it, I have to use imprecise language. I have to do things like talk about its sparkling, or how it makes me feel on the inside. Or I could even go a whole different route. I recently saw a presentation called Wearable Conditions, where art students made outfits of diseases that they would wear, and did it as a fashion show with DJs and everything. It was amazing. My wife is sitting there, and clinical depression comes out. And it was this person with this hood, and their head hung low, and along the back they had hammered tin in plates that scraped along behind them. And so you have this weird kind of jazzy fashion show, and they're walking by and you're, ee! And I will tell you, there could not possibly be a text that could get closer to what clinical depression feels like than that costume did. My wife, don't tell her I told you, she struggles a little bit with it. And for her, like, it was poignant, it was meaningful, it was somebody gets it. You don't have to be precise. And arts-based research is based around that. Arts-based research normally does one of three things. It's either on the arts, which is a reflective interpretation that does not involve direct creation or manipulation of an artistic encounter. You're examining something, you're talking about it, you're critiquing it. There's research for art, an examination of practices typically aiming to make some concrete alteration to the process of creation. This is a technique that works well, this is what I can add, this is something that you should consider trying. Research in the arts uses the arts as a tool for reflection and expression, a notion that challenges pre-existing notions of, I have too many notions there, meant by research. That is kind of what I was just talking about. And what I did kind of used all three, because I was looking at what American Freeform could do, how the ideas could form artistic experiences, what effect they had, what kind of knowledge it produced. All right. It's at this point I realize I shuffled my papers, so I'm going to completely ignore what I wrote. So, arts-based inquiry comes from several different places. I was actually referring a lot to artography and arts-based educational research, but I also incorporated a direct critique of those two things that said, you are relying too much on what can be known. There is too much that cannot. So I incorporated all three of them into this thing that I called participatory arts-based inquiry. The participatory was a big, important part of it. I wanted my participants to be completely aware of what I was doing. I wanted them to have a stake in it. I wanted them to help determine the play, whole 9 yards. And at the end of it, it was meant to be productive. Essentially, what we were doing was recreating educational experiences. They created a school, and within that school, they created characters that they played that were different than their everyday reality, the principal, the parents, the students. And they're familiar with them. They engage with them every day, but it's a perspective they normally did not access. Now, like Keira said, you don't know exactly what it's like to be principal, capital P. You do know what that character feels. And knowing that gives you what Maxine Green calls a sense of possibility. You begin to try to understand. Instead of just being blocked by time, by the limitations, by, oh, I've got testing again. You never see them. They're just giving you these things that you have to do in your classroom, and don't they understand? You start to reach out. It doesn't mean you understand. It means that you comprehend what they do as a human possibility. Okay? I also drew a little bit on respectful design. Jessica is sadly not here with us. She's an awesome person if you haven't looked her up. And part of that involves considering the limitations of the media, what is best for participants, and what's best in the context. Just generally good ideas, I find, for research. LARP as a media for inquiry. Jessica actually asked me when I did the first presentation on this, what art could bring as an academic discipline to LARP studies. And having thought about it afterwards, I'm like, legitimacy. Because, frankly, an awful lot of academic scholars refer to LARP as art. Most of them do not have a doctorate connected to the arts. So, I'm your man. But specifically, I can talk about why it's valuable, and why it's valuable exactly because it is imprecise, that it surrounds experiences, that there's more than the linguistic, that you have shared symbolically mediated meanings. You have a thing where everyone has shared an experience. They're closer because of that, they know each other because of that, but that experience is simultaneously personal to them and communal. It is both those things. And that is the artistic approach, a certain amount of ambiguity. American Freeform was something I chose for a couple reasons. One, doesn't have a whole lot of rules or pre-existing expectations, made it real easy to teach. Two, incorporates lived experiences, which is kind of where I wanted to work. I was looking to explore for a productive cause. And three, it had the meta techniques that disrupt assumptions. If you don't disrupt the assumptions, you just recreate them. The principle is as the principle was. We have to find ways to disrupt. All right. American Freeform games contain particular affordances when employed as a media of inquiry. This is actually not something someone else made. This is something I made. This was one of my very first relationship maps. It involved the ball of string technique, which I'll come back to later, and that was what we had decided were the connections between characters. And then I shared it with the players. They were like, yep, that was it. We moved on. So the initial construct we worked with, the very first one was using my game, What to Do About Michael. If you know Michel Foucault, I will tell you my wife is super sick of hearing his name. Like so tired of it. And every time I encounter a binary, I'm like, binaries! If you don't know Foucault, you're all right. He basically talks about how power works and how we become instruments of power. I designed What to Do About Michael because I found as people studied Foucault, they would go, that is right, that is true, I have seen it happen to so many other people. I am glad I am not like that. So I designed What to Do About Michael to say, yes you are, because I was, and I realized it. And from a Foucault perspective, you can't necessarily get away from that, but realizing your role in that system allows you to affect change. There were 5 players that covered that. At the end of it, we had 4 sessions, 20 different characters, and had played scenes ranging from sessions with counselors, to family dinners, to Michael's grappling with conflicting emotions inside of his mind, where we all played his emotions. We played with time a little bit. At one of the family dinners, the parents had Skyped in, which was an interesting comparison to what happens afterwards. And the direction that that went was determined by the participants. We played a scene. The first scene was a teacher meeting about Michael who had attacked another student. What do we do about it? And then after that, everyone determined which way we would go, what meta techniques we would do, how would we proceed. And that's how the narrative evolved out. That's how we got to know Michael. That's how we got to know Haley. That's how we got to know the principal. That's how we got to know everyone and the kind of complex connections they had formed. So a couple differences from American Freeform. One occurred over several sessions. This turned out to be important. I'll come back to it later. It's a little unusual. Normally, American Freeform, to steal from Emily, is the short, sharp shock. Not so much what we were doing. 2, the setting points of interaction were determined by the community as a whole. It's not something that I set upon them. And 3, I should have had some water. Debriefing occurred through the creation of artifacts and pre-brief, as well as the regular debrief. Before every session, we talk about what had happened last time, what we thought about, where we were going with it. Down on the bottom, you can see a couple more things. The person who played Michael made a Facebook page for him. One of the advantages of working with art educators is they have a certain amount of knowledge. There's Photoshop in action. He was thinking about his own students and what they would do in 7th grade. And then over on the other side, you can see someone who played Michael's dad. They had a very conflicted relationship that had formerly been very good, and she chose to represent it that way. The artifacts were actually shared at the pre-brief. This turned out to be pretty important also, because we did so much that was communal and relied on each other that the artifacts were a chance for you to have the spotlight. This is about me. This is about what I think. We use 8 different meta techniques, including ball of yarn. I realize not everyone necessarily knows it. I've been talking about it for so long that I sometimes make the assumption. The basic idea is that you have yarn, you throw a ball, and you shout out a relationship. We totally played edu-larp together. And then John catches it, and he defines the relationship. We were lovers. Then he throws that ball to someone else, possibly Evan. Go ahead. And says, we were at this conference together. And Evan defines the relationship. And we keep going until everybody's got the ball. Voices in my head, which we use to let Michael directly confront his conflicting ideas. I played anger, which I hate doing, because I'm good at it, and it makes me uncomfortable. And we had anger, we had guilt, we had hope, and we turned down the lights, and everybody was kind of walking around the guy playing Michael, and it got super intense, you guys. But even though it was the least mimetically real to the players, it felt the most actually real, and the closest they were going to get to understanding the character. Last, we used the locked eyes technique from Arsamandi. We actually didn't use this for lovers per se, but we used it to ramp up the intensity. At the end, we had a parent meeting with the principal and one of the guidance counselors about whether Michael would be allowed to stay. We locked eyes during that talk. I will tell you, love was not the emotion that was going around, but a whole lot of intense emotion that gave us a lot to think about what we bring to those experiences. Oh, I should also mention, over on the side there is Haley's scrapbook page. Haley was Michael's, curse you 1 minute! Haley was Michael's older sister. She had a reputation as being the perfect older sister, which was a hard thing for her to have. So I've only got 1 minute, so I'm going to go on super speed here. You can see another one of my maps as they got a little bit more complex. I created research puzzles throughout this that we actually worked from. They're a little different from research problems because it's not a question with response. It's a what kind of experiences cause what kind of effects, and trying to look at nuance. I specifically dealt with power relations, the impact of discourse, and how American Freeform worked. Sorry, I'm going a bit fast now. It was a multi-method approach, as I've already kind of covered, that focused on experience and participant voice. And when I did the data analysis, we used in vivo codes. We talked about a whole lot of collective making of meaning. And at the end, I applied my own discourse analysis, which I still sent back to the participants. The short version is that power is contextually specific. You have to believe a person can do a thing in order for them to do it. That unity can bring the appearance of power without necessarily actually giving you as much flexibility as you need to get the effects that you want. And that American Freeform heightens the feeling that knowing a thing is not the same thing as experiencing it. A couple more things reflecting on Michael's emotions there. Because I have like maybe 15 seconds left, I'm going to look and see if there's something I want to skip to here. Short version, American Freeform is awesome. You should look at my PowerPoint and you should read my paper and tell me the same thing. Couple of limitations, I've already kind of covered that there's some limitation of the knowledge. You have to cover ambiguity of expectations that comes from unknown factors. You don't know what the end is going to be, don't pretend that you do. And we also relied a lot on pre-existing experiences. We built on those in order for this to have meaning. I think part of the problem with a lot of edu-larp is it doesn't include scaffolding. You need to build on some kind of way into the knowledge. And if you don't do that, you're not going to have a meaningful result. Participants have suggested that I continue with this and that I incorporate it into teacher training, which I actually did for the first time this year. I've also run it at an art educator conference. I'm thinking about designing other games that are conference specific. Problem with what to do about Michael's, it doesn't really work that well when you only do it once. And I would also like to apply them outside of my own discipline, such as with medical colleges. Those are some of the things that came from OAEA. A little more focused on solving a problem rather than exploring an idea, which is part of why I was talking about it had to come back. I'm so sorry that I ran a little bit over. I'm done.